Hello, and welcome to Cycle 6 of the Game Revolutions series. It's been a minute, so let's recap where we left off. In the previous series, Game Resurrections, link in the description to the playlist, I unearthed some code that I had started writing in high school for a TRS-80 color computer assembly language Moon Patrol clone. I used DriveWire and Toolshed to bring the code to my PC, where I could study it, run modern tools against it like LWASM and the MAME debugger, and relearn how it works and where I'd left off. In this series, I've been improving the code, adding techniques like double buffering, stack blasting, and self-modifying code. At the end of the last installment, I still noticed some video tearing, but also realized that the MAME debugger was improperly reporting where the video beam was located. So I mentioned I'm going to be taking a break from this series. And in that time, I posted a video about interrupts, which I highly recommend you watch before continuing. Link in the description. I also posted videos about fixing the bug in MAME and other MAME topics, about tricking the VDG into displaying too many colors, accessing the full 64K of RAM, and a whole series on sound. Now I'm ready to get back to the moon. Today it's all about speed. We're going to be finding that low-hanging fruit that we can pick to make things more efficient. And I'll be using the MAME debugger as a kind of crude performance monitor. The resulting speed improvement is stunning. And we will talk about synchronizing with the VSYNC interrupt to ensure we get no video tearing at all. Plus, Burt Reynolds, Eva Gabor, and SZA. So here we are again, back in MAME, running the same code as last time, except this is the patched MAME. So we should now be fully synchronized with everyone's idea of where the scan line really is. The beam X and the beam Y should be accurate. They should be properly synchronized with the interrupts, and perhaps we have no tearing anymore. As I look at it and I look at those mile markers at the bottom, they do look a little blurred, like sometimes I'm seeing two at once. When I look at the mountains, they seem mostly okay. But now let's do that step by interrupt trick again. So I'm going to hit F7, and we stop on the interrupt, and we take a look, and everything looks fine. Again, no tearing. Keep stepping. The ground should be going every time I press the button, but it isn't. There's sometimes that it skips. That is a problem. Oh, I don't know if you saw it. There was a tiny little speck of something over here. That shouldn't have happened. I mean, it looks a lot better than before, but there's the occasional issue. And now focus your eyes up here. Now that everything is fixed, we should expect the beam Y to constantly be the same number or in the same very small range right around when blanking starts. Here it's up at the very top in the middle of blanking. Now it's at the bottom. Another 20 scan line difference from where it was before. Okay. Oh no. That is all over the place. Again! Still! What could be going wrong? Well, folks, I have an idea of what's going wrong. Check out the frame number. We expect that every time I advance, that should go up by 1. It should certainly never skip. So we're 6935, still 6935, same frame, just a little bit lower, and it hits it again. 36, 38. We're at the top of the next frame rather than the bottom of the frame where we should have been. 38 again, so twice in that frame, one to the top, one to the bottom. We skipped 2 because we're at the top of the next frame. This is not consistent. If I keep on going, we'll see that sometimes it does the same frame twice, sometimes it skips a frame, because it's not reliably happening on the same scan line every time. What could be the problem? Because of all the stack blasting we need to do, we constantly need to disable the VSYNC or the field sync every time we're about to do some stack blasting, and then when we're done, we do that here, we do that here, a lot of places. What if our stack blasting, what if all the processing we're doing is just taking too long? What if we're taking longer than 1/60th of a second to do all of our processing, and as a result, when we finally re-enable VSync, it was past due, and so it happens immediately. And maybe sometimes it's not past due. You know, if we're doing the ground every time, but we're doing the mountains maybe every 3 times, maybe when we do the mountains, we're taking longer than when we just do the ground, and so in that case, we're exceeding our budget for running between field syncs, and sometimes we're not exceeding our budget, so we've got some more performance work to do. And something that I've been meaning to work on is, first of all, we've got to add some stuff back, but also we are stack blasting a lot of stuff that never changes. We could be more selective in what we stack blast and let the other stuff that doesn't change just stay solid. Leave that yellow stripe solid. Leave most of this blue solid. Leave most of this green. We're already doing some of that. We could do more. While making it faster is definitely something we need to address, that is not all. Take a look at how we're doing double buffering. When it's time to shift from showing the first graphic screen to the second graphic screen, we do this to play with the VDG. And when we need to swap back from screen 2 to screen 1, we do this with the VDG. But we do not coordinate this with the field sync interrupt at all. We do not use the field sync interrupt at all. All we do is we disable it when we're doing stack blasting so terrible things don't happen. But what if the VDG happens to be in the middle of the screen when we do the swap? Then that means the top half of the screen will be one buffer and the bottom half of the screen will be another buffer. Double buffering is not some kind of magic bullet that just makes everything smooth. It definitely helps, but you've got to coordinate with the field sync interrupt if you want to make sure you don't have any tearing. So we've got to do both of these things, optimize and actually start using the field sync interrupt. So here are the first 2 main changes that we're going to do. Every time where we disable VSync and then re-enable it, we're just going to comment out that code. So even though we're using stack blasting here, don't worry about disabling and re-enabling. Same goes for copy rectangle. Don't worry about disabling and re-enabling. Instead, take a look at the main loop. We draw the rotated background, we draw the rotated ground. Eventually, we're going to come back and draw the car again. Rotate the mountains, blah, 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 blah. And then at the bottom of the loop, here's where we re-enable VSync. So we basically keep it disabled all the way through all the drawing. And then at the very end, we re-enable it. And then shortly after, we disable it again for the next iteration. Between those 2 things is the marvelous sync instruction. If you saw this video, you saw my introduction to this instruction. This is an alternative to creating an IRQ handler. IRQ handlers waste a lot of time. We don't have that kind of time. But the sync instruction does is it just waits for the next IRQ and it just holds. And as soon as that IRQ comes through, then it releases and then we go on to the next instruction. So this allows me to synchronize the code that follows with the next IRQ. And since field sync is the only IRQ that we've enabled, this is going to hold until the field sync interrupt has occurred. Then we can do our swap-a-roonies. We can switch the VDG from showing screen 1 to screen 2, or switch the VDG from showing screen 2 to screen 1, depending on where we are. And then it's back up to the top of the main loop. So that's the main structural change. We basically keep field sync disabled almost the whole time until the point at which we need to synchronize to it. We enable it, we sync, we disable it again, and then we can do our buffer swapping. And the second main category of change is to just make this faster. And the low-hanging fruit is to just stop doing stuff we don't need to do. So this routine here, draw static 2, that's responsible for drawing the static portions of the screen that don't change, like that yellow status bar at the top where the score goes, the static blue sky, the static green ground, all of that stuff. What I have been doing is to redraw every frame by scratch. And that allows easier animation of the sprites across the different parts of the screen. If we start each by scratch, then it doesn't matter where the bullet is going or where the car is jumping to. The background always gets redrawn, and then the car or the bullet or whatever gets drawn on top of it. I really liked this idea because it just made things simpler. But it's time to come back to reality and realize that maybe some things can't be as beautiful as I want if I want them to be as fast as I want. So now, draw static 2 gets called before the main loop. So we call it for each of the two buffers, the graphics 1 buffer, the graphics 2 buffer. So they're born with those static portions of the screen ready to go. Then in the main loop, which starts here, we don't do that anymore. Instead, it's all about the things that move. Pulling that out of the main loop really will speed things up. The downside is that when I move sprites across static portions of the screen, I now have to go back to erasing the portions of those sprites that need to be erased. I can't just rely on the redraw of the background to handle that. I now need to go back to drawing the right color where the bullet leaves, or the right color behind the car when it moves. First, let's add the Earth back to the sky. We removed it when we moved to using double buffering and stack blasting, and it's time to add it back in, but we're going to try to be smart about it and only draw it once per buffer before the loop begins. So once we've drawn it once per buffer, we're not going to keep redrawing it over and over and over again. So the way it fits in is that just before the main loop gets started, we call draw static 2 twice, once per buffer. Draw static 2 adds the yellow status bar at the top, static blue sky, and then the Earth. And copy Earth makes use of these helpers that I was using in the big stack blasting routine. I have a helper for whatever number of bytes you want to copy. Since the Earth is 6 bytes per row, I just call copy 6 a bunch of times, once per row. I point the S register to the bytes of the Earth. So S will start right over here, and you'll see we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 organized, 6 bytes per row. And U points into the screen buffer, which is this, offset by however many bytes it takes to get to where the Earth ends. So this is going to start at the very end of the Earth, and all of the pushes will keep moving it up, 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 while S points at the beginning of the bytes of the Earth, and every pull will bring it down, 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 down. And the loop looks like this. We copy 6 bytes, which just does that pull and that push. And then self-modifying code tells it how to get out of there and return. As you recall, I can't use RTS and I can't use BSR because I'm already using my stack register to do the stack blasting. I need to adjust my destination buffer by moving it up, but my source buffer is automatically adjusting itself as it goes down through the bytes. So S I can leave alone, whereas U needs a fix-up. I keep track of how many rows I've got, and I keep looping as long as I have more rows. And then when I'm done, I'm done. All right, let's take a look. Our Earth is back, and everything is moving, hopefully properly synchronized with the vertical sync interrupt. And it should be going a bit faster now that we're not doing all of that static stuff. So all this yellow stuff, we're only drawing it once before the loop starts. All of this static blue and Earth area, we only do that, well, I guess once per buffer before the loop starts. And then and the same with all this green stuff here. The only things that we're moving and doing every time are this mountain area and the ground area. So let's see how fast this really is. I'm going to set a couple of breakpoints, one before the sync and one after the sync. So that's going to be locations 3E5B, 3E5F, 3E5B, 3E5F, All right, so let's start here. And for now, I'm just going to be looking at the frame, and hopefully this isn't going up by more than 1. So before the sync, we were at 8790. And after the sync, we're still at 8790. Before the next sync, 92, okay. 92, 94, 94. Okay, we're going up by 2. Yeah. That's better than before, though. And if we take a look at the beam Y, before the sync, we tend to be like at the beginning of the frame. And then right afterward, we're at the end. So it looks like we're using up a bit more than 1 frame each time through the loop. And what the sync is doing for us is it's letting us wait until we get to the V blanking at the bottom, and then we can do our buffer switching. So the next time around, we got up to 8816, top of that frame, a sync, and then that brings us to the bottom of the frame. It's better than before, but we could do better. So what would you do? What more here can we optimize by simply not doing as much work each time through the loop? Well, my eyes start to focus here on the ground. I'm rotating this whole thing every time, including all of this solid red. Why? Because it's easy. But the only things that are really changing, as far as anyone could see, is the scraggly top of the ground and the mile markers. So what if I use stack blasting just for this top row of the scraggly ground, and then I didn't even use stack blasting for the mile markers, I just did them manually. I just kept track of where one of them is supposed to be, and then I draw it in the next location, and then at a fixed offset from that, I do all the other ones. Meanwhile, the rest of this ground is just drawn once per buffer before the loop, just like all this other static region. Will we do better? Going back to our main loop, this is the part that does all of that rotating stack blasting. This is the background, the mountains and the buildings, and this is the ground. Let's take a look at what it looks like now. In the old code, we were using the full height of the ground. In the new code, we're just using the height of the very top of the ground. And that's just 1 byte. So we're just going to stack blast a single row to rotate that part. So you'll notice we're not doing anything with the mile markers yet. Let's see what we've got. Okay, I don't know if we could tell that it's faster or not, but it looks like it's doing the right thing. We have to add the mile markers back. Let's use our debugger to see if we're doing any better performance-wise. The locations are the same, BP3E5B, BP3E5F. Do that a couple times. All right, so we're at breakpoint 1, frame 3337, and then we're still there. And then next time around, aha, 3338, and then we're still there after the sync. Next time around, 3339, and then we're still there after the sync. And now if we take a look at the beam Y, we'll see we're like maybe mid to bottom of the frame before the sync, and then right into V blanking. And then again, mid to bottom of the frame. So now we're no longer skipping a frame. Every frame gets to participate in the game. Woohoo! Hopefully adding the mile markers won't mess that up. Here's the code to rotate the top of the ground, and before that, in the same routine now, is code to deal with the mile markers. This variable keeps track of the offset of the very first mile marker from the beginning. So that offset starts off being 7, and each time through we're going to decrement it so that it appears to be going to the left, to the left, to the left, to the left. We then take the offset into the screen buffer of where the top line of those markers need to be, and we add it to that. And then we add that into where the current screen buffer we're writing to starts. And we keep track of that in this variable here. So think of this as the realized location of where mile marker 1 really begins, as calculated from this simple offset 0 through 7. A will be the byte value that we're writing. And that's simply 7F, so that will give us a pixel of yellow, and then the rest of the byte will be red, the color of the ground. And this is the height of each of the markers, and the height is 8 rows tall. And so first we do a loop where we draw the mile markers themselves. So this is the loop, and since the mile markers are offset by 8 bytes from each other, we just start writing into the calculated X position, and then add 8, add 8, add 8, and when we're done, we move down to the next line, and we decrement our row count. And as long as we're not done, we keep on looping. Next, we do exactly the code I was hoping I would never have to do. I was so happy with the idea of double buffering and redrawing each frame from scratch, because that meant I never had to do animation stuff, where I figure out where something goes and figure out what to erase. But in order to be fast, I have to do the stuff I didn't want to do. So now what I need to do is erase the prior locations. So roughly what I'm doing is I'm grabbing that calculated mile marker 1 top location, and I'm adding 2 to it, because the mile marker should have been 2 bytes to the right. But why 2? Aren't they moving by 1? If you take a look at what I'm doing with mile marker 1 at the end, I am decrementing it by a single byte. So why am I now compensating for that by adding 2? And the answer is because I'm doing double buffering. Double buffering was supposed to make animation easier, but now it's actually making it even harder. Because the previous location of the mile marker was 1 plus this, but that was in the other buffer. Remember, I'm trying to deal with this buffer I'm writing to right now. And since each buffer takes turns, adding by 1 means the next buffer will add by 1. Adding by another one means the first buffer will add by 1, and back and forth. They alternate. So where did this buffer previously draw its mile markers? Well, it was 2 plus wherever X is pointing. Ugh! It's so gross! But anyway, the rest is the same. Only difference is I'm now writing a solid red byte rather than that yellow mile marker plus the rest is red. And I'm writing it to the same offsets to X. I add 32 to X to move to the next line. I decrement 1 from Y, which is the row count, and then I just loop this whole thing over and over again until it's done. And then here is where I actually update everything. I generally decrement the mile marker, but if the mile marker is already at 0, then I reset it back to 7. And now finally I'm ready to do rotating the ground. But there is something that I did kind of gloss over. Before I add 2 to X and do the erasing, I do this little weird stuff here. I ask if the mile marker's X location is bigger or smaller than 6. Most of the time it will be less than 6. It will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's when I add 2 to X. But if the mile marker is 6 or 7, then I need to erase backward. Most of the time the mile marker is somewhere between 0 and 5 offset from the left. And so that means its previous location in this buffer was just 2 bytes to the right, and so we erase it. And next time through, we're going to erase where it used to be in that buffer. Next time through, we're going to erase where it used to be in that buffer. Next time through, we're going to erase where it used to be in that buffer. But now look at what's happening. The next time through, this is going to be mile marker 1. And we still need to erase this over here. So we start our erasing rather than 2 plus, we need to kind of erase backward, which shifts by the left 6. So instead of erasing over here, we're going to erase this. And that's where we start our erasing, and then we keep jumping by 8s, 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 which will eventually erase this one here. So the idea is there are a couple positions where we wouldn't be erasing this thing on the left side unless we take extra careful precautions. All right, well, it's up and running. Let's take a look. Looks like it's doing the right thing. Now let's set those breakpoints and see how things have slowed down. So again, it's going to be 3E5B and 3E5F. And so starting here, we're at frame 3166, still there after the sync, 67, still there after the sync, 68, still there after the sync, pretty good. And so before the sync, we're at 184, and then a V blank, 184, then a V blank, 186, then a V blank. So pretty, and even 160 something. So not too bad, not too much time spent on those mile markers. Let's see how it stacks up. This is what we had before our optimizations, and this is what we have after. I think it is pretty clear that the after is much faster, and I think it's all the more impressive given the fact that in the before, we were not wasting cycles trying to synchronize with the vertical sync. After, we're actually spending a bunch of cycles waiting in that sync instruction, and still, it's that much faster. In the next episode, we will bring back the car, and we will find a better way to do the reflector animation effect and see if we can get that even faster than before. Until then, thank you for watching.